Hi guys, Unabridged here, and today we're going to be continuing the tale of Emily Windsnap. So let's go. Chapter 15. The good news, they didn't keep us in the tiny wobbly cage forever. The bad news, they separated us and threw us each into an even tinier one. This time, it was more like a box. 5 small tail spans from side to side, and a bed of seaweed along one edge. It was all Mr. Beeson's fault. How could he have done this to us? I sat on my bed and counted the limpets on the rocky wall. Then I counted the weeds hanging down from the ceiling. I looked around for something else to count. All I could find were my miserable thoughts. There were plenty of them. A guard swam in with a bowl of something that looked like nothing like food that I suspected was my dinner. What are you going to do with? He shoved the bowl into my hands and disappeared without answering. It's not fair, I shouted at the door. I haven't done anything. I examined the contents of the bowl. It looked like snail vomit, green, slimy trails of rubbery goo spread on top of something flaky and yellow that looked suspiciously like sawdust. Gross. I pushed the bowl away and started counting the seconds. How many of them would I spend in here? The next thing I knew, I was lying on my side on my horrible bed. Someone was shaking me, and I slipped around on the seaweed. Mom? I jumped up. It wasn't Mom. A guard lifted me up by my elbows. Where are you taking me? I asked as he clipped a handcuff onto my wrist and fastened the other one onto his own. Is that so? You want the window open? Yes, you do. Sorry about that. But of course, he didn't answer. He just pulled me out of the cell and slammed the door behind us. Strong, silent type, are you? Are you? I quipped nervously as we swam down along the tunnel-like corridors and around curvy corners, then down more long corridors. We soon arrived at a mouth-like entrance with shark teeth across it, like the prison doors. The guard knocked twice against one of the teeth, and the jaw opened wider. He pushed me forward. Once inside, another guard swam towards us. I was attached to a different but similar wrist and whisked along a different. Hey, no. I'll close that window. You want me to close that window? No? Don't claw at it. I am so sorry. Uh, and this journey took us somewhere different, but different. Hey, hey, no. I'll be right back. Okay, very different. We reached the end of another long corridor when the guard pushed me through the door. There were no more tunnels. I was looking out at the open ocean once again. Twice. She just wants attention from me. I am sorry. I can't get through one sentence. Balaam. We reached the end of another long corridor. When the guard pushed me through the door, there were no more tunnels. I was looking out at the open ocean once again. For a moment, I thought he was setting me free, except I was still attached to his wrist. The sea grew lighter and warmer. Something was coming into view. Color, the light. Not dancing and jumping around like the Great Murmur Reef, but shimmering, sparkling from the depth of the sea. As we drew closer, the lights emerged into shape, like a big house. A huge house! Two marble pillars so tall that they seemed to reach from the seabed to the surface stood on either side of an arched gateway, a golden seahorse on a plinth in front of each pillar. Jewels and crystals glinted all the way across the arch. In there, sorry, in there, the guard gestured toward the closed doorway, nodding at two mermen stationed on either side. They both had a gold stripe down one of their tails. As the merman moved apart, the gate slowly opened. We swam toward the arch. Long trails of shells dangled from silver threads above us, clinking with the movement of water. What is this place? I asked as we swam inside. We were in some sort of lobby, the fancy kind they have in really expensive hotels, only even more lavish and kind of dome-shaped. Chandeliers made from glass-like crystals hung from the ceilings, splashing mini rainbows across the walls. In the center of the room, a tiny volcano shot out clouds of bright green light, an underwater fountain. The light flowed over the top of the rocky cauldron, bubbling and frothing and turning blue as it melted onto the floor. Don't you know anything? The guard grunted. This is Neptune's palace. He pushed me forward. Neptune's palace? What are we doing here? I thought about all the things Shona had told me about him. What was he going to do to me? Would he turn me into stone? We swam across the lobby. Two mermen with long black tails passed us, talking hurriedly as they swam. A mermaid looked up from behind a gold pillar as we came to the back of the lobby. Reaching into his tail, the guard pulled out a card, and the mermaid nodded briskly and moved aside. There was a hole in the wall behind her. Up there, the guard swam into the hole, pulling me along, around and around, spiraling upwards through the tubes. We climbed the upside down summer slide till we came to a trap door. The guard opened it with one push and nudged me through. We came out into a rectangular room with glass walls, a giant fish tank, except the fish were on the outside, all brightly colored yellows and blues, darting around, looking in as the guard led me to a line of rocks along one edge and told me to sit down. A notice in front of my row had a word written in capital letters. Accused. Accused? What had I done? In front of me, there were rows of coral seats. People were loitering here and there, dressed in suits. One wore a jacket made of gold reeds with a trident on his chest. I watched him flick through files, talking all the time to a mermaid by his side. A merman on the row behind them in a black suit was whispering frantically to a mermaid next to him as he too shuffled through files. At the front, a mermaid facing the court sat at a coral desk examining her nails. Behind her was a low crystal table, and behind that, the most amazing throne, all in gold and black, of the seat tapered upward into three prongs filled with pearls and coral, downward into a solid gold block. The round seat was marble, with blue ripples carved outward from the center to the edges. A golden seahorse stood on either side of the throne, each arm a seahorse body, each leg its tail, stretching downward and curling into a massive diamond at its base. The throne towered over the court, powerful and scary, even when it was empty. Every now and then, the mermaid in the front desk of the throne uh, rearranged the items on her desk. She had a row of reeds in a line across it, one on the top edge with some plastic papers beside them. On top of these was a sign saying clerk. A huge pile of files was balanced in one corner. In the other, a grumpy looking squid sat with its tentacles folded into a complicated knot. I wouldn't blame the poor squid because he's being used as for ink. That's kind of painful, wouldn't it be? The mermaid kept glancing backward at a gateway behind the throne, which was gold and arched and covered with jewels like the palace entrance. The gates within it were closed. A splashing noise opposite me drew my eyes away from the front of the court. Two guards were opening a door in the ceiling. They had someone in between them. Mom! The guards unhooked a mask from the ceiling, like the ones she and Millie had when we were captured. Mom clumsily strapped it over her head, a tube leading from her mouth up through the top of the box. She looked around the court with frightened eyes. Then she noticed me, and her face brightened a tiny bit. She tried to smile through her mask, and I tried to smile back. Outside the fish tank, a row of assorted merpeople were taking their seats. A portly mermaid undid a velvety eel from around her neck as she sat down. She made the others all move so she could make a seat for an enormous jewel-encrusted crab. Another huddle of merpeople with notebooks and tape recorders chatted to each other as they sat down, reporters, I guessed. Along the back of the court, a line of seahorses stood on a silent row. They looked like soldiers. Then a hush fell on the room as a sound of thunder rumbled towards us. As the noise grew louder and water started swishing around, the clerk grabbed her table. People reached out to grip their ledges in front of them. What was happening? I glanced around as I held on to the coral shelf. No one else looked worried. The waves grew heavier and thunder louder until the gates at the front of the court suddenly opened. A fleet of dolphins washed into the room, a gold chariot behind them filled with jewels and crystals. The chariot carried a merman into the room, at least 7 feet tall. He had a white beard that stretched down to his chest, and a tail that looked as if it was studded with diamonds. It shot silver rays across the room as the merman climbed out of his chariot. Sweeping his long tail under him, he slid into the throne. In his hand, a golden trident. It was Neptune, right in front of me, in real life. A sharp rap of the trident on the floor, and the dolphin swiftly left the courtroom, whisking Neptune's chariot away. Another rap, and the gates closed behind them. A third, and the water instantly stopped moving. I fell back onto my seat, thrown by the sudden calm. Up! A voice bellowed from the front. Neptune was pointing his trident at me. I jumped back up, praying silently that I hadn't just doubled my whatever sentence I was about to get. He leaned forward to talk to the clerk, gesturing towards me. The clerk looked up at me too, then picked up one of her reeds, poking the squid with the reed. She wrote something down in black ink. The squid shuffled grumpily on the edge of the desk and refolded its tentacles. Eventually, Neptune turned back to the courtroom. He stared angrily around, then with another rap of his trident, he shouted, "Down!" Everyone took their seats again as the seahorses at the back split into 2 rows and swam to the front of the court. They formed a line on either side of Neptune. A merman in the gold jacket stood up. He bowed low. "Approach!" Neptune bellowed. The merman swam toward him, then he ducked down and kissed the base of Neptune's tail. "If it please your majesty, I would like to outline the prosecution case," I began, straightening himself up. Neptune nodded sharply. "On with it. Your majesty, you see before you a mermaid and a human." He screwed up his face as he said the word, as though it made him feel sick. Pulling at his collar, he continued, "The pair of them have colluded and connived. They have planned and plotted." "How dare you waste my time?" Neptune shouted. He lifted his tridents. "Facts." "Directly, your majesty, directly." The merman shuffled through a few more files and cleared his throat. "The child before you today has forced an entry into our prison, damaged a section of the Great Murmur Reef in the process, and assaulted one of our own advisors." "And is there more?" Neptune's face had turned red. "It's all in here, your majesty." The merman handed a file to Neptune, who snatched it and handed it to the clerk without looking. The merman cleared his throat. "As for the human," he forced out the word, "the same charges apply." Neptune nodded curtly. "Once again, Mr. Mr. Slippery, will that be all?" "Absolutely, your majesty." The merman bowed again as he spoke. "If I could allude to one outstanding area of this case." Neptune clenched his fist around his trident. The man spoke quickly. "In apprehending the accused, a merchild acting with the help of another human," he cleared his throat and swallowed loudly, "was discovered in the vicinity. Millie and Shona." I slapped my hand over my mouth to stop from gasping out loud. "Both merchild and other human are being held awaiting instructions from the court." "From the court," Slippery. "Any old court is that?" "Your majesty, they await your divine ruling." "Thank you, Mr. Slippery," Neptune boomed. "If I may, you now call upon my first witness, Mr. Charles Finwright Beeston." As Mr. Beeston entered the court, I folded my arms. I tried to cross my legs, but I remembered they were a tail, so I couldn't. He looked different, somehow, as he swam towards Neptune. I realized what it was. I've never seen him a merman before. Mr. Beeston bowed low and kissed Neptune's tail. He avoided looking at me or Mom. If I may refer you to my notes, a line of bubbles escaped from his mouth and floated up through the water as he spoke. To your lies, you mean, I said to myself. Your Majesty, last night I was tricked into a rescue operation involving a yacht and a small motorboat. I was beaten around the head with a broom and tied up, while the accused, he looked quickly at Mom, then at me, suddenly breaking his flow for a moment. He looked back away again and coughed quietly before continuing. Before they carried out their unlawful plans, thankfully the accused were amateurs and not equipped to deal with high-ranking professionals such as myself. He paused and turned toward Neptune. Beeston, do not presume to look to me for compliments. Continue. Mr. Beeston's face reddened. Of course, Your Majesty, and so I disembarked and sought the strong fin of the law. You swam for the guards. Indeed, I did, Your Majesty. Thank you. Neptune banged his trident on the floor. Defense! He bellowed. Mr. Thinscale, your first witness. The merman in the black suit jumped up. Thank you, Your Majesty. I looked around the court, wondering who his first witness was going to be. Get up, the guard next to me grunted. You're on. Then he pulled me up out of my seat and pointed towards the throne. I swam nervously toward Neptune, taking my cue from the others, bent to kiss his diamond-studded tail. Neptune pulled on his beard and leaned down. You understand the charges? He asked in a slightly quieter voice. I think so. Speak then, he snapped. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Well, I stopped and looked around the courtroom, and there were people watching on all sides. Some were staring at me, others were talking quietly or laughing at me, probably. My tail turned to jelly, and I was about to say no when I caught my mom's eye. She removed her mask for a second and forced herself to smile. Do not make me wait, Neptune growled. That was when I realized what I had to do. Sir, Mr. Do I look like a sir? A mister, do I? I flicked a tail a little, propelling myself higher. Then my 3 feet 8 inches, presuming my tail was long as my legs. I had never checked, and looked nervously around the courtroom. Your Majesty, I corrected myself. I know this might sound weird, but well, it's actually kind of nice to be here. A murmur flickered through the room along the rows outside it. Reporters scribbled furiously on their pads. Nice, did she say? I heard someone ask. Is she being sarcastic? Another one replied. It's what I've always wanted, I added quickly. Not being in a court about to get locked up for the rest of my life, obviously, but being here with all of you. It feels right. I glanced at Mom. I mean, I know I'm part human, and my mom's fantastic. She raised me all on her own and everything, but my dad's great too, not just because he's a merman, so I get to be part mermaid. I paused and looked at Neptune in the eyes. Although the part's absolutely wicked, I said. Neptune leaned forward. He scowled, narrowing his eyes at me. I mean, it's fantastic. It's swishy. But more than anything, I'm proud of him because of his belief in love. I pulled the poem he'd written out of my pocket and held it out. My dad might have hadn't been locked away, but his feelings weren't. I glanced at Neptune. A tick was beating in his cheek. A glare shone in his eyes, but his body had softened a little. The grasp on his trident had loosened. You can't make people stop loving each other just because a law says it's wrong, I said. The dolled-up mermaid with a pet crab wiped her eel across her cheek. Another took a hanky out of her coat pocket. A few mer people were nodding. I heard someone say in the back, she's got a point, you know. Neptune let out a thunderous sigh and a huge mock yawn. My dad fell in love. So what? What did I do to deserve to grow up without a father? I continued. Tutting noises were spreading through the spectators' seats. A couple of them shook their heads. I wanted to see my dad, that's all. Is that so wrong? I paused, looked at my mom. If it really is so terrible, if love is such a horrible crime, then fine, lock me up. Lock up my mom, too. I turned back to Neptune. Your Majesty, that merman, I pointed to the first who spoken. He wants us imprisoned because of laws that were written centuries ago. Things have changed. Humans aren't all bad, you know. As I looked around the courtroom, I paused on Mr. Beeston's face. Neptune remained silent. Hey, even one of your top advisors had one for a father, I said. Mr. Beeston lowered his eyes as people turned to look at him. If it can produce such a loyal, devoted merfolk as such Mr. Beeston, can it really be so wrong? I let my question hang into the air for a few moments before turning back to Neptune. I couldn't think of anything else to say. I only wanted to see my dad, I said finally. Neptune held my eyes for a few seconds. Then he banged his trident on the floor. I will not be told my laws are wrong. How dare you presume? He got up from his throne, banging his trident again. Everyone instantly rose to their tails. The gates behind him opened. His chariot was waiting outside. Court will adjourn, he barked as the dolphin swam into the court room. Then he leaped into his chariot and swept out of the court. I slumped back onto my rock and waited to hear my fate. I hope you enjoyed listening to chapter 15. Thank you so much. Be Please check out the links down below in the description. It includes a Patreon if you want to support me. Um, I currently cannot afford a lot of things. I am struggling, so even I don't care. If you want to, that's fine. No pressure at all. I'm just saying it would help. Thank you so much for listening, for subscribing, for ringing that bell, for checking out all my socials. I love you guys so much. Thank you, and I'll look out. Peace.